Do you like boss fights? How about 57 of them? V Rising throws an insane number of bosses at you, with 57 unique encounters, each with their own abilities, rewards and mechanics. If you enjoy the gameplay loop of killing bosses, unlocking new recipes, crafting new gear and moving on to the next boss, this game won't let you down. But such a clear-cut and possibly monotone gameplay loop has its pitfalls as well. So let's find out if V Rising avoids these or falls into them head first. Let's start with what V Rising does well. From the first few minutes the game explains itself very clearly. The tracking system to find bosses is fantastic, you always know what your next big objective is. And this constant stream of manageable objectives makes for a very addictive gameplay loop early on. Combat also feels smooth and clear. It sort of feels like an ARPG but a little bit slower, which isn't a bad thing at all. You get abilities really quick, weapons also feel impactful and the bosses are fun and very cinematic at times. Add to this a building system that is genuinely one of the smoothest that I've seen in any genre. And you have a game that does a lot of things well. But it does a lot of things, and it does these things pretty early on in the game as well, which means that it can be a little bit overwhelming.
This will not work.
As an example, within 15 minutes of starting the game, I had several abilities, several weapons, a full gear set, healing items, a separate blood type system, another menu for non-combat abilities, spell upgrades, jewels, and a castle system to manage. Now that is impressive, but it can also be overwhelming. And to be honest, I felt it at the start of the game. There were so many things that I didn't know what was important and what I should focus on. And you get used to these different systems and in the end it works out pretty well. But I feel like for most average players, it'd be better to spread these out a bit more in the early game. You wouldn't really lose anything in the early game either by introducing certain systems a little bit later. A major highlight for me in the game were the boss fights. These were done very well. The tracking system to hunt them down is very satisfying. You're never really running around aimlessly wondering where the boss could be. Theory crafting which spells to use before a fight was one of my favorite parts. Switching these abilities to counter bosses that are slightly above your gear level felt smart and rewarding when you got it right. Then again, I sometimes feel overwhelmed with the amount of choices that I had in these spells, wondering which I should use. But the further that I progressed into the game, the more I started to feel that certain things were just a little bit off. One of these things was the mobility during late game fights. Some mechanics just felt borderline untouchable unless you were playing perfectly. Or I felt forced to use weapons that gave you an extra mobility option. And speaking of weapons, I think a big letdown for me was that not every weapon felt viable. This combined with the inability to target specific weapon upgrades made for some interesting situations. On the one hand, it forces experimentation and can lead to discovering a new weapon or playstyle that you really enjoy. But on the other hand, it can be incredibly frustrating when you just want to upgrade the weapon that you know and enjoy. For me, this happened with the Reaper, a weapon that I was really enjoying. I created an entire build around it and it was working really well for me. But eventually I felt forced to switch to a higher tier weapon just to keep up with the gear level of the bosses. This did however lead to me discovering the godsend that are the pistols, and I never looked back after that. I think it was around gear level 40 where the honeymoon phase ended for me. The game essentially tells you to farm materials for an extended period at that time. And while farming is all fine and it is a part of games, the gameplay loop just doesn't really evolve beyond farm material, craft, fight boss, unlock next tier, repeat. Nothing fundamentally changes beyond the boss mechanics. And this is where the monotony started creeping in for me. Not enough to stop playing, but enough to notice the downside of a game holding your hand so strongly in the early game and giving you reward after reward. That constant dopamine rush is amazing, but you can't keep that going for the entire game. It has to slow down somewhere, and when it does, that moment just doesn't feel right or good. And once this constant dopamine rush had stopped for me, I started noticing a lot of cracks in the systems. Like certain forms. Let's take the toad and spider form. Does anybody use these? I did not touch these in my entire playthrough. And the bat form, which is amazing. But I felt like this came way too late. This should have been like a late mid-game thing, not a late game thing. And while I appreciate being able to jump down off ledges, it feels strange that I'm not able to really jump up in a game that has so much verticality. And I thought that this is what the toad form was for, but I could not jump up on ledges with the toad form either. And then you have the sun mechanic, where if you're walking in the sun you get damage, which thematically fits really well. I'm a vampire, I'll avoid the sun, right? But it can slow down the pacing significantly when this leads to you just waiting around in the shadow. I think for me this was one of the biggest annoyances in the game, where you'd be in a flow of hunting boss after boss, and then you'd have to stop because the sun was out. And sure, you can go back to your base and craft some stuff, but I just wanted to keep going. And by the final bosses, the skill level really goes up as well, or well, at least the HP pool. For me it felt less like mastery and more like trial and error sometimes. Certain times I was just throwing myself at mechanics until it magically worked. Sure, that's probably a lack of skill on my part, but did not have that issue with the first 50 or so bosses. I also feel like this game exists in a weird limbo where it's not constantly action-packed enough or fast enough to feel like an ARPG, but it also doesn't lean hard enough into survival mechanics to feel strategic enough on that side. Sure, it has the survival tech on Steam, but I honestly don't think I would really call this a survival game at all. And the last thing that really let me down was the lack of epic music. I felt like the setting and the theme were perfect for some sweeping orchestral masterpieces, but I can't say that I really noticed the music at all in this game. With all that said, let's look at a final verdict. I think Fear Rising is an extremely polished game. The systems that it has are well designed. The building system is smooth, and a lot of games with building can learn a lot from this. The boss fights are engaging and overall just really well done. The early and mid game are just one long big dopamine rush and very strong. Then on the other side, the things that weren't as great, I'd say the late game slows down too much and it felt too grindy at times compared to what you're offered early on. The lack of music really caught me. It's something I personally look at a lot, so might not be as important for everybody. Even though the systems are well done, I think the game risks overwhelming players with too many different systems and abilities that aren't always used. I'm looking at you, Spiderform. And finally, the pacing of progression feels off at times. I think the most glaring example of this is the bat form. You should be having this way earlier in the game. All in all, I think Fear Rising is a very well polished and fun game. If the gameplay loop is something you enjoy, you will get a good 50 hours of fun out of this game, which, for its price tag, amazing. And that's it for this review. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Mojo, and I hope to see you again next time.